of family medicine at Boston Medical Center and a clinical associate professor at Boston University, and as well as an associate at Harvard Center for Primary Care, a Health Innovators Fellow at Aspen Institute, a highly selective fellowship that catalyzes leaders to improve U.S. healthcare. Dr. Gergen Barnett's research career has really been focused on innovative models to care of care to address chronic medical conditions, physician burnout and engagement of community partners, to create feasible solutions to increase health and wellness, and to address medical distrust in traditionally marginalized communities. She is involved in local and state health policy, addressing health inequities, national policy addressing primary care delivery, and she's a regular contributor to the Boston Globe, Boston Public Radio, and multiple television outlets. So with that, we're thrilled to have Dr. Gergen Barnett with us today, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. So I'm really pleased to be here with new friends. And, obviously I'm not going to be talking about surgery today. So based on the, last month's topic and next month's topic, this may seem like a little bit of fish out of water, but it seems to me that it aligns nicely with this idea of how do you take what you're doing and from good and make it excellent. So I was actually asked by Dr. Sabrina Sanchez, who is a friend and a colleague, and I know a colleague of all of yours, who I work with at Boston Medical Center, to come and talk a little bit about op-eds, why they've become important to me, some kind of thoughts about how to construct op-eds, how to pitch op-eds, and then we're actually going to have some time for folks to kind of think either in small groups or take a few moments to think about some ideas that they might want to pitch, and we'll go from there. So before I kind of dive into, some of the nuts and bolts of op-eds, I wanted to share a little bit about how I got here and why this matters to me. So Boston Medical Center, I think most of you are aware, I know you're from all different places, is the largest safety net hospital in New England. I've been there 18 years. I'm family medicine, not surgery, but have worn lots of different leadership hats in that role. And but the most important thing for me is the power of getting to be with patients and getting patient stories and bearing witness to the ways that policy continues to shape people's health, and how often I felt that there was a gap between what I was seeing and what the layperson understood about what was happening inside the walls of the hospital, what was happening beside the walls of the clinic. And despite the fact that I was writing lots of, journal articles, I think those are deeply important, don't get me wrong, but I didn't always feel like that was necessarily going to move the needle in some of the policy pieces that I was seeing. So I actually first started writing around mental health and some of the stuff that, this was 2019, what things that were needed in primary care and in medicine in terms of investing more monies into mental health. And then the head of the Globe, actually, the head of the opinion pieces said, I'd love to just go out to coffee with you. And so we went to coffee in January of 2020 and, started talking about what it would be like to have some sort of regular kind of voice within the Globe, and especially thinking about how do you translate what's happening inside of what we see every day, primary care and surgery, into the power of the narrative for the reader of a paper. And little did we all know, although we had rumblings at that time that, just a couple of months later, the world would be changed and that I would be not only sort of obviously, full in on the hospital, but also having a lot of material to comment on in terms of what was happening in our healthcare system, what was happening around policy. So just wanted to take a few of those lessons and distill them down. And then I really want this to be interactive. So I know it's really easy when we're all in our own bubbles and it's 5 o'clock at night, at least here, to kind of zone out, but I really want this be an opportunity to truly be enriching for all of us, because I love collaborating. And I actually wrote an op-ed with the head of our trauma surgery, Tracy Deckart, who you might know. And it was one of the most, powerful pieces that we got to write in terms of how do you address trauma as a surgeon, as a primary care doctor, how do you collaborate? So there's a lot of really good possibility for collaboration. So let's see, I talked so much, my slides weren't advancing. So, let's just kind of break it up, really basic. I think we all are aware, although op-eds, news, all of that, I think we, some of us may be traditionalists. I'm still a huge newspaper reader. I actually get a paper newspaper, a physical copy of a newspaper on my front doorstep every morning. Not everybody is. Some people get it through feeds, in which case, opinions can look really different. But, just to think about, like, a lot of us, I'm guessing some of you here, I certainly will say on my own end, I got called a lot from the news sources during the last 3 years. And I actually had a lot of opportunities to work with news folks. It's a lot less work. You have no control over the story. The reporter controls the story, and you may not be able to get your topic out the way you want your point across, right? So in an op-ed, it's a lot more work, but you can control the message. And you get to, really think about how you shape it from your perspective. So what is an op-ed, coming back to some of the basics. So I wanted to just kind of break it up. So when you open up a physical paper, right? So some of this is true in digital print as well. So you have a piece where it's the editorial, right? And there's no byline for the editorial, and that's written by somebody in the editorial byline. So you don't ever have a guest editorial. There's a large editorial staff. Some of it, you may recognize the voice of the editor if you start to read things more, but there's always an editorial piece. And then there's often a syndicated column. So it's sort of like somebody who's regularly on the staff of a newspaper there. And then there's the op-ed or the guest column. So that's the money. That's what we're talking about here. So that's really an opinion piece. It's by, a member of the community. And it will sort of give the byline. And I always find it super interesting to see who those people are, and oftentimes it's somebody who has a new chapter of a book coming out, or, I don't know how many people here read the New York Times, but there was an amazing opinion piece by the gentleman who 3 years ago, Black birder, a gentleman who identifies as a Black male, who is the birder who was stopped in Central Park. I don't know if you remember that story, but he actually gave his perspective 3 years later about what that incident was like for him and what that incident has done for his life, and the kind of what's happening in the birding community and making it more inclusive. So there's really all kinds of opinion pieces that can be in there. And then there's a letter to the editor, which I will talk about in terms of how that's different from an op-ed. So, what it's not, right, is it's obviously you're not reporting, you're not doing a progress report, you're not giving a medical kind of report, or you're not writing up your latest RCT or whatever it may be. You're not responding to something that's been previously published, and obviously but you're not making a pitch for some sort of fundraising. Although certainly, there are regular op-ed writers who often will highlight the work of really good community-based organizations, and I've done that, but it's not a pitch to give them money, but you hope you're lifting and elevating other folks. So letter to the editor, this is I think we all know what a letter to the editor is, but you're responding to something that has already been done. And I will just say, before I kind of move off of this slide, I feel like I want to just take a look at you all, and I would love to see if people can show by show of hands how many people have ever done a letter to the editor or an op-ed. So you can take your camera off, you can raise your virtual hand. I don't see any hands up. No? Okay, Rebecca, I see you shaking your head. Oh, Nathan. Okay, terrific. Nathan, can you unmute yourself and say which of those categories? I see you're unmuted.
He says, sorry, I'm at the DMV in the chat.
That's hilarious. Okay, so Nathan, you have to write an op-ed about your experience at the DMV. Okay, so when you get out of the DMV or in the chat, you can tell us what your experience is. Okay, so a lot of folks here who have done none of the above, but hopefully after today that will be different. So all right. So why am I even here? Well, the fact is I talked to you about what happened with myself and the head of the Globe editorial pages who said, we need these voices. So I am here to try to inspire your voice to go in papers, to go in journals, to go in places where you're not just publishing academic journals. I do think that our voices are unique in terms of what we get to see, what we bear witness to. And I also think it's an incredible way to advocate for our patients. We do not even understand sometimes the power of our voice. And I think that things that we think are obvious, that we see every day, are not obvious to people who aren't living with what we see. And I also think it's a way to, I think, we would all agree that healthcare is in a tough place right now. And I know in the introduction is talking about medical distrust, and I would just say distrust generally of medicine and of public health, and how do we continue to engage through our voice. So lots of examples, obviously thinking about your own personal narrative, current public health policies, residency, right? The work that you all are doing, medical education, what's happening in surgery. I think these are all really, really important topics. Obviously, you're not going to give so much information about somebody that it is going to be a violation. But I will say, because, I think it's important for us to think about as doctors, I've had patients whose stories were so compelling that it drove the narrative, and then I got written permission from them, even though I never gave their name. If somebody knew them really well, they would know that it could be, Mrs. Jones. And so I think that's really important for us to think about. So thinking about what are different ideas. Okay, so news events. How does it relate to the mission? How does it relate to your medical institution? What's happening with funding in your medical institution? What are some of the ACGME things that are coming towards you in surgical education? What are some of the nonprofits or local organizations that you're working with? Could you think about collaborating with them? Again, I think that's really important. It doesn't have to just be your voice. And in fact, it's sometimes even more powerful, especially with the pen of a surgeon. I think if you're collaborating with a community-based organization, that's pretty amazing and can be very compelling. What are some of your other expertise? Thinking about where you live, what your management skills are, what's your leadership skills, and thinking about other guests again that you could work with. So now let's just kind of give some brass tacks. Okay, so what are the actual important pieces of writing an op-ed? Okay, so the beginning. So you always need to start with a short lead. I will say, as somebody who was used to doing journal articles and then longer pieces, and came from a background of, a lot more writing, the short lead is hard, but it's critical. You need a hook for your reader. So think about all the things that you've read in the past. And I can tell you our attention span is worse than ever. So if you're not brought in the very beginning, then it's done, right? And it has to be not just short, but it often is very compelling when it's about a story, right? We humans are drawn by the story, we're drawn by narrative. So something where it's either bringing a really important current event, recent current event, that's on everybody's mind and tying it to that, or some sort of human interest, even if you're going to get really technical later. Okay. So then right after the short lead, you're already pitching your main argument. You're not burying it. You're not sending it in the middle. And then really importantly, you have to have research supporting that argument. So, even though it's an op-ed, you have to use some sort of documentation, whether it's stats, recent articles. You're not going to do citations the way you do in, academic papers. But you actually, when you're working with your editor, especially if it goes online first, you'll have hyperlinks to each of those sources. And those sources can be sources, that like the FDA just put out, last week. You can have a link to their website where that was just put out, right? So you don't have to wait until it's published as a paper. And then you're going to need to propose some sort of change, or why are you writing this, right? So is it, do you want something different in the medical setting? Do you want something different in the public policy? Do you need funding to be different for it? What is it that you're pitching? And then you go back to the main argument. Obviously you don't just repeat it, but you need some sort of hook. I will say I often end my op-eds with a quote, just because I find that really powerful. There's a million amazing people that one could quote, but that kind of like sticks with people in some way. Any questions about this piece of it? There's a lot here.
I don't have a question, but I'm out of the DMV if I can be of help.
Oh, yay. Wow, that was so fast. Oh my gosh, I've never seen a DMV be that fast. Okay.
Well, I wish I could say that I was successful.
Oh, okay. Well, then that makes more sense. So tell us, you raised your hand that you had written either a letter or an op-ed. So I'd love to hear from you what it was and what your experience was.
Sure. So in medical school, I wrote several op-eds about, little frivolous things that were kind of entertainment value type stuff for the University of Kentucky newspaper. So it wasn't anything fancy or anything, but I loved doing it. It was a nice distraction from med school.
That's terrific. Yeah, so that's a perfect example. It doesn't have to be connected to your work. Obviously, I'm connecting it to medicine because, I'm here talking to you all and that's what I do. But it could really be any place. And I think it's a perfect example also that it doesn't have to be some, national newspaper. It could be a local newspaper, and that's a great way to start if people are interested. Thank you for piping up after you left the DMV. Okay, so anybody else have any questions before we move on to this? And I really am hoping people unmute themselves and jump in, because there's nothing more boring than listening to myself after seeing patients all day. Yeah, please.
I'm sorry. I was going to say you might cover it later, but I was just curious. When you submit one of these pieces, is there a lot of like back and forth in terms of like revising like some of the things you've written, or like how much control do you have over that?
It's a great question, Rebecca. I will cover it a little bit in terms of like what we can't expect from the editor. right? Because you want to really make the editor happy. You want to make sure that you're like smoothing, smoothing the way for any future communication. So the short answer is that you do not want to have a lot of back and forth. You basically want it really tight. And then you are hoping there's not a lot of changes, but if there are a lot of changes, you don't want to like quibble about that. You're not going to be like, I really love that word. If there's certain things that you feel like if you're going to edit it out, it's going to lose its point, then you can kindly suggest that is kept in. But we'll go over that. I think that's a great question. Other questions? Okay, so because I am going to have you guys on the hook for doing some of your own thinking, and you can't leave before you do that. Okay, so it's really not long. Op-eds are not long. They're usually 700 to 800. I sometimes would, have done longer pieces, but that's an ask. So plan on writing like 1,500 and then cutting it down, right? What wasn't Mark Twain the one that said like, I would have written you a shorter note, but I ran out of time, right? So it's like this idea that it's much easier to write something long than it is to write something short and succinct. And so you don't have a lot of room. So you got to be really clear about that kind of the model that I was talking about. So you're going to want to think about, okay, what kind of paper would I want to publish in, or where would I want to put an op-ed? Let me start by, first of all, you don't need to subscribe to it, but start reading and seeing what kind of things do they cover? What kind of voices do they have? Are there voices that they don't have that you think fill in nicely? I talked about the compelling hook, super, super important in terms of thinking about what's the relevance to the community and how do you make it a local angle, right? So I'm often talking about Massachusetts policy and politics, and then I can telescope it out to think about what's happening on the national stage, but start local, go national if that's part of what you're thinking about. Really think about what your key arguments are and then make your opinion and state it assertively. You're not gonna win any readers if you're sort of lukewarm on whatever your opinions are. And then obviously you need to build an opinion, but back it up with facts, and don't present your facts first. Okay, so opinion, facts. Okay. I'm happy to share these slides too. Okay. So this goes back to this question of where do you pitch it, right? So easier is local print, hyper local websites. I'm sure like there's a million now, right? And then it gets harder, although it's kind of more interesting. So I've had stuff in Huffington Post before. I think that's interesting because it reaches a different audience. So sometimes you're like, am I just preaching to the choir? Am I actually going to change anybody's opinions? You do have people who read really, will have a really broad readership no matter where you are. But I think as it gets harder, you have more diverse readership. And then obviously daily metro papers and national newspapers. So, and then, once you have a relationship, it's easier. Okay. So how do you stand out from the crowd in terms of pitching it? Okay. So sometimes, you have a warm, introduction and most of the time you don't. So it's just like, dear editor, right? So you're really, again, thinking about, Rebecca asked us like, what are you going to need to do to make them super happy? So make sure that you're following all the submission guidelines. We've talked about it, having an opinion, be pleasantly persistent. So unless you have an in, it's okay to recirculate, and just be like, hey, just circling back on this. You could explain why you're the best person on this. I don't, include a headshot. That's some of the other kind of advice that's out there. So I put that out there. I think people can find your headshot if they look for you. Like, I don't necessarily think that editors are looking for pictures, but you could, especially if it's local. Okay, this is the slide I was talking about. So don't submit it to lots of places at once, right? It's like an academic journal. You're not going to be like, oh, here JAMA and here New England Journal of Medicine, like here's my article, and let me know what you think. Just do one place at a time. Don't demand to hear back the same day, obviously. Don't expect a commitment from them to publish by a certain date. I've had since I built a relationship, I've been like, okay, this is a violence like awareness month. It would be awesome if it could be published by the end of the month, right? Don't expect multiple rounds of editing. So that's what we were talking about. So, I think for, again, like all the lessons we've learned about academic writing, just throw it out the window in terms of that. Like, they're not going to have the patience for that, and be really, I didn't write this here, but it's really important, be super available. If they say they're going to print it, but they're going to send edits by a certain time, I've literally been in the middle of patients and like just sent a note and being like, I will send edits back to you in 2 hours when I'm done with my last patient, right? So it's like making sure that they know exactly what your timeline is, so you're so accountable, because otherwise they'll just move on. There's lots of people who want to write stuff. And yes, don't call to double check whether they've received it. Be pleasantly persistent, but not annoying. I guess that's kind of like the lesson for a lot of things. I think there's a fine line there. All right. So I would love for people to you're not allowed to sign off to get your credit for being here. And if you have a pen and paper in front of you, great. If you are still commuting from one place to the other, that's totally fine. Just, I want you to think about this. So, I want you to come up with 1 or 2 ideas about what have you seen? What are you thinking about? What's one thing that you have been sort of hands on fire, passionate about recently? Something that's kind of that you think you have a unique perspective on. It doesn't have to be unique from each other, but thinking about somebody who would open up a newspaper in the morning or in the evening, that you would love to write about. It could be something that you want to see a change in, something that you want to highlight. Okay. And I'm going to give people 5 minutes, leave these questions up, to just sketch out a couple of sentences. And then I am going to ask some people to unmute themselves. But before we have anybody start, any questions that people have about these questions about the questions?
Is there
Joe,
any cost involved at any point?
Any cost involved? Is that what you asked?
Correct. I'm sorry.
Bless you.
Thank you.
No, publishing op-eds are totally free. They're always free to publish. So that's a great question. And I will remember to highlight that earlier. So think about it as an opportunity to get an important point across to thousands of readers for free. You have to put some skin in the game, but think about how many more readers you could have than you may have on an article you put in a journal. I'm not saying both aren't important, but there's no cost. And it's a different readership. Any other questions? That's a great question.
Does this end up going into social media?
Absolutely can go into social media. So people will depends what kind of social media you use, but people tend to retweet articles, put it on LinkedIn. I'm not of the age where I'm using things like Snapchat, but I don't think people Snapchat op-eds. I'm pretty sure that's not a thing. But it can get even more generation of readership from social media. So I've actually had op-eds that I've written that I've then had somebody posted, say on LinkedIn or on Twitter. And then I've had somebody reach out from across the country who's really interested in this kind of work, and we've started collaboration. I've become a PI on a grant based on somebody reading an op-ed that I wrote. So it's like really surprising what can happen. And it's, I would say, social media for the good. I haven't seen it for the negative, but if you're writing something that is really volatile, who knows what could happen on social media. Does that answer your question?
It sure does.
Okay, wonderful. Any other questions before we do some of our own reflections?
I have just an unrelated question. I need to jump off, unfortunately, but I just was curious how you cite this on your CV, if at all.
Great question. Okay, but I will expect your reflections at another time. I have and kind of following other folks. So you absolutely write them on your CV. It's really about public voice. So you can't do it obviously in peer-reviewed articles. You don't put it there. And you actually can write opinion pieces. I have television pieces that I've done. I'm a regular on public radio, and I have op-eds, and they're all my CV. And while, many places will say, well, we don't count that towards promotion, if you have enough of these kinds of things, they add to your national voice and your national status. And, I'm like, I'll be going up and I'm, getting promoted to associate in a couple of days. And that's, it's through a lot of different things, but this is one of the places is bringing in the national voice, right? And again, getting your opinion out there means that you are invited to more talks. That means you're invited to do more research and do more collaboration. So yes, the short answer is definitely you should put it on your CV. Put everything on your CV. Don't hesitate. The moment you do it, get out that CV. That's a whole nother talk, but man, is it important.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Anybody else? I see some other people unmuted. I don't know if you have questions. Okay. So, nobody else can run away. I'm gonna give you 5 minutes, okay? And then we'll regather.
Another question while people are working. So I know if you're going to do like a perspectives piece for a journal, those can often be collaborative. Are op-eds ever collaborative in nature, in having multiple authors or contributors?
Oh yeah, sorry, I wasn't making that clear. You definitely can make op-eds collaborative. That's part of what I was talking about with the importance of community voices or doing something really different. You don't want usually more than 4 voices. That's sort of pushing it to the max. I would say 2 is great, but you can get up to 4. And then it's harder, to be honest, but it's really fun.
I don't think you mentioned this specifically, but what is the turnaround time like, or the time from like when you pitch it to if they like it, when it would be out there published?
Totally depends on the outlet. usually within the month. You know, but again, it really depends, on, you know, how timely is your op-ed? How much does it touch something that's really kind of a hot topic? How big is, you know, remember that thing I said from easiest to hardest in terms of your outlet? You could start with something, again, start with a local paper, get your kind of, your feet wet, and then have the experience. It's so satisfying, when you see it, and then you can use it as a talking point.
Sorry, I have one more question. I know you said like opinions and then facts, but is there like an area for citations or at the end?
No area for citations, you just hyperlink it. So when it goes, on the, like, they're all published, newspapers will also do it online. And then online, sometimes you actually only get your op-ed online and not in print, right? Because they actually have to have enough space on the printed page. So don't take that as an insult. It's still a success if it's just, online. You can send it to still 1 million people. But everything needs to be cited. It's just not like how we think of it. So you just like hyperlink it.
That was about 5 minutes.
Was it enough? We felt like we were talking so much. Okay, so we will, wonderful. Thank you for keeping me in check, Joe. So anybody feeling brave enough, sure enough, even like if you want to work, think of this as like kind of a workshop. So any ideas that people had while they were kind of reflecting? Doesn't need to be perfectly baked out.
I mean, I guess I can share if no one else wants to. Um,
You're
Uh,
totally welcome to. You're breaking the ice, and then I'm gonna start calling them
okay,
people.
we can start with this and then somebody else can share there.
Perfect. Amazing.
So yeah, Joe, Becky and I were just talking behind the scenes about a project idea that in the 5 minutes I titled Patience and Gratitude for Your July Healthcare Team. And so the argument is simply like, one, be nice and patient to your healthcare team in July, because that's when the new interns come. And, you know, you may or may not know this, but there's a common I say phrase, I don't know what the actual phrase is, but sort of like stay out of the hospital in July is a,
Sure.
you know, thing that we
Yes.
hear. And it's
Yeah.
meant to say, nobody knows what they're doing. It's chaos, you know, interns are new. They don't know, you know,
Yeah.
like it's unsafe. And so, I think an interesting argument and perspective would be that, you know, understanding that, yes, there are new doctors on the team, but they bring an excitement, they bring a fresh perspective, they bring like a safe nervousness of they want to make sure they're doing the right things. And
Yes.
there is a very strong sense of teamwork during that month, because all of the other members of the team are, you know, doing their best, knowing that they want to make sure that the intern is doing well and that the patients are taken care of. And so I think that, you know, I don't know if that's been written yet, but that would be our idea.
I love that idea. And it's almost like, reframing it as like, actually, maybe July is the safest month, right? Because you have all these safeguards. The thing that I might suggest is like, is there a moment that you remember from a July where you were on the wards or somebody was, where there was like, more people than not watching a case because it was July, right? So it's like, you make the argument, but again, take the big idea and make it really granular and like a way that people are like, oh my gosh, I read this really interesting article about this intern who didn't miss this like really important diagnosis because everybody was sort of with the intern, right? So kind of fleshing it out in color is like the piece that I would suggest to add to that. But I think that's a really, that's a great piece to write. And
Cool.
so
So
that
you
you guys,
think like you share like a specific example you're saying?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise it's just an idea. Like people are like, okay, well, why should I believe that? Like she's just arguing for something, or they're just arguing for a counter narrative. So people need examples and then data, right? So it's like, use the personal voice to drive an example and then drive it with more data. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Anybody else?
I would like to talk about prohibitive cost of medical education in our country.
Tell me more.
Prohibitive cost of the medical education in this country. You can't afford it anymore. We outpriced ourselves from the entire world put on one side and us.
Yeah, so highlighting the cost of medical education in our country and how it's become unaffordable. And then, there's tons of statistics for that. What would be your, what change would you want to see? I mean, is there like a different country that you turn to? I'm asking these questions, obviously I have my own opinions on them, but I would be curious, what argument would you want to see with that?
I see the brain drain going in the opposite direction. I came in this country 60 years ago, and we were draining all the brains from the world. Now, according to some of the data around, our stuff is going back in the other countries. We're draining it backwards. And in the long run, is that going to hurt us?
Yes. Yeah. So in other words, it's so expensive to get medical education training here that the brain drain means that it's leaving the US. And what is it going to do to the health of the United States as a result? Is that part of what you're arguing?
Correct.
I think that would be amazing. And I think, and I know, I know that you have the perspective that you just mentioned about all the years that you've been here, so you can give your historical perspective, right? And so that in and of itself is really critical. And then I think giving some sort of, again, statistics on what was happening 30 years ago, what was the cost of our medical education, what's happened since, and what now is happening with the brain drain. So kind of tracking some of that through the data, I think would be really interesting. And then, like, is there a call to action? Is there already a group of advocates that's doing some of this work? And would you want to lend your voice to their work, right? Because that might be a really nice way to leverage the power of the op-ed, and also means less work for you. Right. So I think looking, like, if this is really important to you, and it's a very important issue, looking to see who or what is already addressing this and offering your wisdom. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ming Lee, I see you nodding and smiling. anything that you have been thinking about?
Sure. I'm sorry I missed the beginning part of your talk. I was actually volunteering for a high school outreach activity for our department. So I'm a faculty in the Department of Surgery at University of New Mexico. And I was just going through this exercise, and my thought was that, surgeons aren't doing enough on outreach to inspire underrepresented minorities in medicine, to get them interested in careers in healthcare. And then your second question, why do people need to read about this right now? I think we have a shortage of underrepresented minorities in medicine. And we know that patients, and some of the data that I could put together would be, we know that patients do better when their physicians are the same race or ethnicity as themselves. And then what's your unique perspective on it? I think surgeons have, as a surgeon myself, I think we have a lot of time pressure and we just don't get out there. And for whatever reason, we probably lack training and support to do that. And what change do you want to see? It's like more high funding support to train and support outreach activities like the one I went to, so that we can go out there and inspire the next generation of healthcare providers.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I think the fact that you just came from that activity means that it's really fresh for you. So I would encourage you, I know New Mexico is a couple hours behind Boston, so you have some more daylight hours left. I love New Mexico, by the way. Just to kind of take a pen to paper and capture any specific images. Was it a child's face lighting up? Like, was it a specific conversation? Anything that can really bring that the beauty of that experience to light, and then using it to build like actually how unique that was that you got to do that. And as a result of that, what's happening downstream is that, right, like what you were saying about like there's not enough time, there's not enough outreach, and who's going into surgery, who's going to medicine. It's actually very connected to Vijay's, I don't know if I said your name correctly, Dr. Maker, but like your perspective, right, on what's happening on medical education and how expensive it's getting, but very much thinking about the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. So it's a perfect story to begin with.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, maybe one more. It's 5:53. I don't know if anybody else is having the desire to share. I love the pieces that have been shared so far. Sarah, I saw you come on camera. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share. And I also had a final question if there's
Sure.
time. So my idea is also related to kind of this DEI. I feel like that's a topic on, top of mind for a lot of us in the surgical community, but so arguing for that we need to better train our current generation of practitioners to support the next generation of surgeons, particularly those underrepresented in medicine. Why do people need to read about it right now? Because we're doing better at getting in more diversity in terms of our trainees, but we're not necessarily supporting them along their faculty trajectory. I think my unique perspective is like I'm a surgical education scientist, and so I've kind of, I kind of work across the spectrum of surgical education and hear from different folks what their challenges are and what's the change I want to see. I want to see more support for our faculty in those training surgeons to be able to step in when they see things like discrimination happening for their trainees.
Yeah. So it's like taking the piece that Ming Lee was talking about. It's like it's about recruiting, but then how do you retain, right? And the whole idea of the leaky pipeline, And again, I feel like a broken record, but like, what are examples that you've seen where somebody's either been supported and then kind of engaged to success, or examples of the opposite, where there have been failures in the system and, really excellent candidates are leaving. Because I think the more that you have of those examples, the more compelling. And Sarah, I know you had a question too, so I'm very happy to take that, and then we'll kind of wrap up.
Thank you. And it's kind of related, well, it is related actually to what I would
Yeah.
want to do as a piece. So, we have an interesting political climate here in Wisconsin right now, as there are many places. And we were just informed, for example, of some changes in like our hiring practices. And, one thing we can't ask in ways that we used to is about, people's contributions to DEI, or, what we see those being. There's other ways to do it. But anyway, my point is that, certainly I can put out an op-ed, which is, I guess implied that it's my personal opinion, but also we're all coming from institutions. And so how do you, I guess one thing I don't want to say I would fear, but I would be conscious of, putting something out and then someone saying, oh, so that is the official opinion of the University of Wisconsin Department of Surgery. And it's like, well, no, it's my opinion, right? It's my op-ed. So how do you kind of parse, how do you deal with that, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So, anybody who's reading an opinion piece has to understand that it's an opinion, right? So, it's your name on it. I will say that I have a colleague, not in medicine, she's a lawyer, but she wrote an opinion piece and didn't add her title or her affiliation, because she was really speaking from a non-judicial place, right? So if you are, and everybody's, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, like everybody's system is different, right? So I now have a relationship with my comms team where they're just like, go do your thing. But it's probably worth having a meeting. If people are interested, it's worth having a meeting with your comms team and being like, I want to write these opinion pieces. Is there anything, first of all, just saying, what support can you offer me, right? Like, who do you have on your team that can support me? Is there anything that I should be aware of? Right. And like when I'm on public radio, I meet with my comms team being like, what should I not talk about that's happening in our hospital system right now? Not because we're hiding it, because I don't want to highlight, certain pieces as we're working stuff out. So I think it's really important to develop a relationship with your comms team. And then again, if you really feel like it's controversial, or you're, really speaking as a public citizen and taking off your doctor hat, then it's okay just, to put your name. Like, you are a citizen, right, that can express your opinions. And so I think there's both places where your voice can be really powerful and important. Okay, it's 5:59. Yes, thank you. And I just wanted to say, sort of citing my materials. There's like several folks that I used, and then in my own, lived experience. And I really want to encourage anybody who wants to reach out to me directly. Joe has my contact. And I'm really pleased to have met all of you at a late hour from across the country. I know we're all busy, so thank you for tuning in.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. This was so interesting. I think we had a great discussion. Just as a reminder, I put a link in the chat. We have a survey that we send out for every seminar. So if you don't mind filling that out, we can get good feedback on the seminar, and then any ideas you guys may have for the future seminars. We don't want to take up anybody's time, so thank you again. And just as a reminder, July 17th will be our next seminar, where we'll have Dr. Seebach-Sire talking about mentoring. So thank you guys so much, and have a great night.
Thank you. Take care.